Welcome back to Power Lunch here on NDTV Profit. This is the Budget Barometer with the railway budget and the economic survey out of the way. It's all down to the big event on Monday, and joining us this afternoon to discuss what the infrastructure sector needs in particular from the budget, Gokul Chaudhri, leader direct tax at BMR and Associates. Gokul, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Great to have you on NDTV Profit as always. Let's start with, airport infrastructure, and that is a space actually where you see a fair bit of corporate activity. And when I say corporate activity, those running losses with large debt positions looking to exit. Some pain is palpable in the space. From the budget perspective, can Finance Minister Jaitley deliver something that will make investments in the space more palatable?
So, Manvi, here we have the railway budget which come through. It's been railways has been the mainstream on which India moves, really. And that's been from the colonial times. We've had a lot of budgetary attention to the railways. But the public transport system as a whole, specifically airports and aviation, has been building up momentum, and we need to be putting in a lot more capex into this space, which not only means more airports and regional airports for airlines to be more efficient, but the whole ecosystem that needs to go around airports, which is, get MROs in. We don't have MROs in this country of the scale and size that our aviation sector requires. And the interesting thing is, the issues around this space has been known for a while. The sector has been over-regulated, has been overtaxed, has been over-controlled. People haven't really been doing too well in it. And the important thing is that the draft aviation policy that the government has brought out addresses some of the real issues. It puts those issues out for once. And the important aspect thereafter is, will now we get the budgetary allocations for the Airport Authority of India? Will we get the tax concessions that we need for the MRO and other infrastructure to come up? Is that all going to now find its place in the budget?
So you're actually giving me a sense that, the airport infrastructure could be an important piece of this budget, coming as it does after the draft, policy that's been articulated by the government in a sense for the first time. Let's break it down, Gokul, and look at specifically what tax breaks that, companies, investors in this space could be looking for. And, not a laundry list that includes everything and anything, but one or two critical ones to spur investment.
So let's look at the maintenance, repair organizations that are so key for aircraft. And that's a big business around the world, whether it's in Sri Lanka or Abu Dhabi, they have put up a huge aviation engineering hubs there. And once an aircraft has to go into the air for the purposes of going to a repair center, it doesn't mind flying an hour or two more if it's going to get those services at a far more competitive price. So the question was that if you're going to have these MRO hubs here in India, and you're going to have VAT on it, we're going to have service taxes on it, really we're making the entire MRO space non-competitive because you're adding nearly 20% more taxes onto a service. Now, when you look at the policy, it says service tax on output services from MRO should be zero rated. Then it says the VAT should be exempted by the state governments. So it's really about coming down to saying, we want to build this infrastructure, we want to create these jobs, and then more importantly, then the educational system falls in line with it. It creates those courses, it creates those vocations, and is able to create the whole space for hundreds of jobs to be created, if not thousands, along with the fact that you're doing all of this value creation in India, and in some ways, it's all an extension of Make in India.
Indeed, but the question that needs to be asked is it all down to taxes to trigger investment? Because you look at it from any sector's perspective, there's always a sort of, a new generation of entrepreneurs, a need for investment. And we could look at it from any sectoral angle, and you'll find some strong, compelling cases for tax breaks there. Why, in the case of airport infrastructure, do you think that it deserves relatively more attention?
So the important thing is, I did not speak about tax holidays. I did not talk about direct tax breaks. We are talking about transaction taxes, which is there because the aviation business is a highly global business. So when these aircrafts are repaired in the Middle East, when they are repaired in the Philippines, they are repaired in any other part of the world, they're not subject to these indirect taxes.
Okay.
And there's a huge buildup of indirect taxes in our country: excise duty, custom duty, service tax, VAT. You pile this all up, it becomes very uncompetitive to do this in India. and it's very efficient and cheap to just fly the plane out.
I think that you've hit the nail on the head. You did not refer to, overarching tax holidays. You said, let's just focus on the indirect taxes that make the MRO business more competitive. I'm going to change gears from airports to pipeline infrastructure. And there, too, we're talking about a backbone that needs strengthening.
Absolutely. If you go back to the first budget that was presented by Mr. Jaitley, he said, we're going to build 15,000 kilometers of pipelines because we need to create a national gas grid in this country, and this is critical. That was 2014. In the 2015 budget, he again reiterated the same aspiration, and he said we're going to do this through the PPP mode. We're going to have GAIL as a sponsoring agency, and we will have viability gap funding coming in for these projects. So I was very curious as to where we are since then. When you look at by November of 2015 and the response in the parliament that took place, the answer was, well, we are still looking at it. GAIL is being appointed as sponsoring authority. We're going to do some DPRs. We're going to get a PPP out. And then you come to early part of this year, and the status quo is still very much there. So here you got 2014, the finance minister saying we need this national gas grid. We're going to be 2 years down by the time we get to this summer budget session, and we haven't still got a yard of pipeline built. As a matter of fact, we still don't have even the tender documents out for PPP.
Okay.
So the question is, the intent is there. It's a good intent, but we aren't building quickly enough.
Do you reckon that this time the intent is going to be reiterated and that's where it stays? Because, the Kelkar task force as well is looking at, PPP from a slightly different perspective, cutting across sectors, trying to really make the, public-private partnership approach work. So what do you expect, realistically speaking, in this budget?
In this budget, at least in the talk or the speech of the finance minister, I do hope that we find that the finance minister states that he has gone through the Kelkar task force recommendations and the government is going to be acting upon them. I think implementation is extremely key for getting infrastructure projects done. There's also this whole talk of the National Infrastructure Investment Fund, the $6 billion fund that people sometimes call as a Bharat sovereign fund. That's coming up again. I'm very curious to see as to where that goes. So really we have the entire PPP model, which has been thought through by Dr. Kelkar very wisely. And it's a very voluminous piece of documents that he's brought out. It needs to go through the implementation mode. There's a funding mechanism that the government is putting through. Let's see where that goes. It's extremely critical for build of infrastructure in this country.
Well, I have to say that we're all very curious about the National Infrastructure Investment Fund and the form and shape that it's going to take, particularly given recent reports that the stressed assets of the banking system could find their way there as well in terms of financing. On the power sector, the power space, I'm sure you're, a little more relieved with the progress that's been made?
Certainly. On the power side, on the transmission side specifically, we've had the Uday program. Now, the Uday program, if you go through the details of the program, is of course state-driven. The states have to play a very important role in the success of the power distribution and transmission businesses. The Uday program, which has been rolled out by the Ministry of Power, is a sensible way to go about it. But one of the critical issues is, do the states have the financial wherewithal to be able to implement the Uday program that the government is trying to construct? And if the states don't have the wherewithal to do so, or their financial situation is not strong enough to bear the debt burden of the DISCOMs, then the question is, are we still going to struggle on the power distribution side? If we struggle on the power distribution side, it's going to impact power generation too. And therefore, the entire supply chain of energy is going to be impacted because we don't have the last mile viability sitting in there.
But the signatories who are on board, in terms of the states that are on board, some of them are the traditional BMR states as well. They would have done the math and found it compelling enough. I have to take a slightly more optimistic view when it comes to there, because it seems like the ball has been set in motion.
It has, and that's the critical part, that some of the states are coming on board. Are the SOPs that have been put out by the central government adequate, or will they have to strengthen them a little more? Because we are talking about over 4 lakh crores of debt.
Right.
It is a pretty large debt burden for some of the states to take on their balance sheet. And the question is going to be, what can the centre do to help it? And you spoke about the banking stress. The centre has to deal with that too. So question is, there's a lot of people sitting with a lot of debt, which is not very viable at this point of time.
So let's just take a step back and just in broad brush strokes, Gokul, where do we stand on this budget? Because there is the pressure on the government to step up public investment per se. There is perhaps some pressure on the government to find ways to recharge private sector investment, consumer spend. There's an argument for all of those things. What do you think the broad approach is going to be?
I won't be surprised if the government continues with this policy that we're going to increase the capex in a few critical areas, railways, power distribution, and then of course in roads and ports. So I think they're going to put their focus on a few areas where they can actually put budgetary outlays. And then they'll try and make sure they can improve the regulatory framework in relation to the other segments, and be able to bring in investment into those sectors to self-propel those sectors out. Because I don't think he has the budgetary bandwidth to cover each and every piece of it. So I think he's going to have to put his priorities around here. And that's what we're going to be seeing as to where he's going to be putting the priority.
I mean, it seems like we could logically come to that conclusion because those are areas where he's already got some momentum. He's got some momentum when it comes to, the Uday scheme, got some momentum when it comes to the railways. There's been a lot of thinking about the modernization of the Indian railways. And of course, roads, the benefit that's been felt by some of the companies with the government's focus on unlocking the issues that road developers face, we've been tracking over the last couple of months. Gokul Chaudhri.
So one last point, which I would sort of bring in here, Manvi. Maybe, time has come that instead of just having a railway budget, we should have an infrastructure budget. Because, covering this largest spectrum of some of the 50 large or 100 large projects which are in the infrastructure space in a more comprehensive manner before Parliament and showing how the money is being spent will be an interesting way to go about it.
Well, that's actually a compelling point that you've made. Maybe we have to say it often enough and it may take form. Gokul Chaudhri, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon on NDTV Profit. As always, a pleasure to have you here on the show. We're going to continue with the budget theme for a couple more minutes. We have Bhavdeep Singh, CEO at Fortis Healthcare, for a quick sense of what the healthcare sector is specifically seeking from the budget. Bhavdeep is CEO at